evening. Welcome to ABN's Jihad Watch program. I am Robert Spencer, and we are continuing this week with our series of interviews of prominent and important freedom fighters on the scene today working to resist jihad and Islamization and Islamic supremacism. Tonight we have a most fascinating guest, Dr. Nicolai Sennels, who is a Danish psychologist who's prominent in the Danish media for his unorthodox therapy methods that he has actually developed as the only psychologist at, now I'm not sure I'm going to be pronouncing this right, Dr. Sennels, this is Sonderbro?
Well, yeah,
Close
I think
enough?
people would understand what you say. But
It's a youth
Sønderborg,
prison,
yeah.
and I understand that you taught young prisoners there about mindfulness, meditation, and a special program on anger management, which I believe would give you quite a bit to do with the Muslim inmates there. Is that so? Can you tell us a little bit at the outset here about that work and your encounters with Muslim inmates?
Yeah, well, I was the first psychologist there ever, and they just told me to, do what I can do to develop psychological methods, therapy methods that would work with these young people. And in Danish youth prisons, 7 out of 10 inmates do have a Muslim background.
7 out of 10.
So that 7 out of 10 in youth
just
prisons.
incidentally, what is the Muslim population, the percentage of Muslims in Denmark?
We don't know for exactly, because it's not legal in Denmark to make statistics on the on religion among the population. But estimate is between 250,000 and 300,000 out of 5.2 million people living in Denmark.
250 to 300,000 out of 5.2 million. So that's about sorry, I'm not even thinking straight about the math, but it's not, it's less than 10%.
It's less than 10, yeah.
And so you're talking 70% of the inmates in this youth prison and less than 10% of the population.
Yeah.
That's extraordinarily disproportionate. I think that probably people watching us tonight will think, well, that's because of the entrenched Islamophobia in Danish society. But after your work with the...
because we have a good police.
Yes, yes. But would you say that the Muslim inmates there were unjustly incarcerated, or were they there for actions that they themselves had done that you would then encounter when you were dealing with them? I mean, you would hear about when you were dealing with them for the anger management issues.
Well, I would start by saying that if people living in areas in the ghettos with many Muslims would dare to more often report crimes to the police, there would have been many more Muslims in our youth prisons. About 70% of all cases of violence committed in Nørrebro, which is probably the biggest Muslim ghetto in Denmark, is never reported to police because the victims are afraid of the consequences.
Incredible. And
yeah,
so
even
without this, even with this lack of reporting, you got 70% of the inmates. So 70%, 7 out of 10, and you go into this prison. You're the first psychologist there, and they put you in with the. They bring you to work with the Muslim inmates. Not just the Muslim inmates specifically, obviously, but you work with people in anger management. And what kinds of what did you encounter when you did this?
Well, it quite quickly became very obvious that they really have, at least seen from a Western and especially a Danish point of view, they have problems with anger. It simply seems that the way that people are brought up in Muslim families and in Muslim communities, they are taught that anger is not necessarily a bad thing, like we mostly are taught. They're taught that it's a sign of strength and sign of power. And while we see it, I would say Westerners, we mainly see it as a sign of weakness, right? We see people who cannot control their disturbing negative emotions. We see that as a weak point. It's a bit embarrassing and so on. But it's very different with most Muslims. And
well, I find that very much.
So many.
Oh, excuse me, Nicolai. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. that's part of the reason why so many Muslims end up in prisons.
Yes. I was just going to say, when you're talking about anger being evaluated negatively, that this is something that I encounter very often. People tend to judge who wins and loses a debate, not necessarily on the basis of the value of what's being said or the truth or the falsehood of what's being said, but they say, well, look, he got wound up, this guy got angry, and so it's very
Then he
important.
lost.
Yes,
Yeah.
in contemporary American society, and I think probably also in Europe, when in
Yeah.
discussion or debate, to try to keep cool at all times, because anger is seen to
Ex-
be a sign that you're losing and a sign that you are
Exactly.
giving into negative emotions. But this is not the case among Muslims. Is that right?
We have the saying in Denmark that big dogs don't have to bite. They know they're big. They do what they want, right? It's only the small dogs, wah, 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 who bark, right? So it goes very well with what you're saying there.
Yes.
So there was one very big. So we had to simply work on that point, and mm, I'm not sure how much it helped because most of them simply thought that it was ridiculous to simply put away anger because that was one of their main tools when it came to not just physical conflicts but also more verbal conflicts or and social behavior in general.
So,
So it seemed like putting away a very central, very important, very natural um, tool for communication. So what I think it helped them to do is that I think they understood Danish mentality more. I think they understood us Danes more during the therapy. But I, I'm not sure how much it helped them.
did they come in with contempt for the weakness that the Danes would show by trying to contain anger and not to lash out in the ways that they had been taught to do?
Yeah, that's one of the very important lessons that we have to learn from psychology and the psychological understanding and analysis of Muslim culture. And that is that while we see, as you very cleverly put it before, like we see like being able to control negative emotions on as a strength, they see it as a weakness. And that also means that if we don't respond, maybe not necessarily with strong negative emotion, but if we don't respond aggressively and assertive on attacks and so on, they will see it as a vulnerability that can be exploited. And as we see both here in the West and in their own countries, it will be exploited. They will try to. And
This is a
that's
very
simply something we need to understand. We try, we come in with all our diplomacy, our ambassadors, our dialogue, intercultural dialogue, and so on. And it there is no ring and hook in there. There's no ring and hook there. They don't speak that language culturally. They see it as a weakness, and they see it, aha, they're weak. We can attack.
So you're saying that everything that the West is doing to reach out to Muslims in general, to particular Muslim countries and so on, and to try to smooth over the conflict and to bring peace, that not only are these things not working, but they're actually actively counterproductive because they're interpreted by the Muslim leaders and perhaps a great number of the people as well, that as signs of weakness and as a sign that
Very, very much.
they should step up the conflict rather than ease it.
Yeah, I think we could learn a lot from, for example, Israel, the way they handle conflicts with the Palestinians.
Extraordinary. This is really a
I'd
remarkable
say
thing
that
to
as I
say.
say that as a psychologist, as it's a from a psychological point of view, I think they are doing a lot of things very in the right way. I would
By
say in Israel.
reacting strongly, the things that get them condemned by the whole world, that
Yeah,
the things that the world doesn't seem to allow, Israeli self-defense. But you're saying that these very things, the strong responses to jihad terror attacks, are what keep Israel safe.
well, that's what I would say as a professional psychologist with an extensive experience with Muslim criminals and Muslim terrorists. That would be my advice to any state that would try to defend itself against violent Islam. Definitely.
It's It's really
You
remarkable,
have to
Nicolai.
you have to understand. You have to understand. It's all the way back to the old, the Chinese, the Chinese war philosophy and so on. You have to understand your enemy. You
This is
cannot
the
just
one thing the West
take
doesn't
what
do.
works for yourself and what works in your own culture and then push it in and hope that works. You have to understand your enemy. And it seems that we still have a few things to learn there. I hope we will learn it very soon.
I hope so. It seems as if the direction is all moving the other way, that
Yeah.
the Obama administration here in the United States has forbidden any honest examination of Islamic texts and teachings in order to illuminate the motives and goals of the jihad terrorists. It's forbidden. And training materials have been purged of references to Islam and jihad, even when they're discussing Islamic jihad. I mean, it's a ridiculous
Yeah.
situation where American officials, including law enforcement and intelligence officials,
Mm.
cannot use jihad to speak about terror groups, even though those terror groups themselves even call themselves by the name Islamic Jihad
Yeah.
or the Party of
Yeah.
Allah and so on. And it's a ridiculous situation that it seems as if it's basic common sense. I wish that your recommendations were taken seriously at high levels, and that the American defense posture and Europe's defense posture were reconfigured along the lines of Israel's and along the lines of not playing into, not behaving in ways that make Islamic supremacists and jihadists think that we are weak and ripe for the plucking. But in any
Yeah.
case, I know that going back to your story, you worked in this prison, and you have found, as a basis of on the basis of your work there over the years,
Mm.
uh, some emotional indicators, some signs that Muslims may turn to violence or become jihad terrorists. And these you listed in an article at Jihad Watch, which I can recommend to people to take a look at, called Psychology, De-Radicalizing Muslim Terrorists, which I found to be a fascinating piece. And the 8 indicators you listed are anger, honor culture, victim mentality, identity, religiosity, responsibility for oneself, ability to regret, and tolerance. Let's take a little bit of time to look into this more closely. We've been
Yeah.
talking about anger, and when we see that anger is more accepted among Muslims, are you talking about even when Muslims are within their own family settings and among fellow Muslims and there are no unbelievers around, even then an expression of anger that would not be acceptable in the West would be taken with more, would be more acceptable in that context?
Among Muslims themselves?
Yes.
Yeah, very much. You see it, you see it strongly. If you go, if for example, if you work in a prison, in Denmark at least, there you will see the one who are the most. You have the most influence on the other most Muslim prisoners are the ones who are the most religious and the ones who are the most angry.
Huh.
They are seen as the leaders. They're the role models.
That's
And you
amazing.
and if you see it on a bigger scale, you can, for example, you can see you sometimes they celebrate these days of anger, holy anger, days of anger on Fridays when somebody have been drawing a funny drawing about with their prophet. And there you see it's a big thing for them. A day of anger is a good day. That's where they get out of, and celebrate and demonstrate and shoot into the air and so on. So it's a big psychological thing in their culture.
I see. Yeah, I'm reminded over the years at Jihad Watch that many, many times during times of particular tension, when there was the worldwide Muslim anger about the Muhammad cartoons, for example, it would be especially stirred up on Friday afternoon, after the Friday prayers, after the sermon had been heard. Then many, many times we would see Muslims streaming out of the mosques and rioting, killing, and so on. And this is a
Yeah.
pattern that recurs. It's interesting that you note religiosity, the people who are the most religious and the people who are the most angry became the leaders in the prison. At the Friday
Yeah.
prayers, in many cases, those two things come together and make for a very volatile combination.
Yeah, that's where the Fridays there. That's the day where they are the most holy, you could say. Actually, We have some very fascinating statistics from Germany, and I forgot to mention before the former minister of justice in Germany. Now he's a professor in a big university in southern Germany, and they made an enormous project. They were interviewing 45,000 young people from all over Germany, from all, with all religions, with all backgrounds, and so on. And what they found is that when it comes to religion, the more religious young people are, the more peaceful they are, except for Muslim youth. That's the opposite. The more religious the Muslims are, the more aggressive and the more ready they are to use violence. This is a very big study. It was intensive interviews with 45,000 young people, and it just shows that there are apparently some aspects, psychological aspects of their religion that promotes violence, that promotes anger, that promotes all these unhealthy things that you can see also in brain scannings are very unhealthy to people. Makes them more depressive, makes them more frustrated, makes them less able to fall in love and sleep well, and so on. It's not only bad for their surroundings; it's very bad for themselves as well, both on a psychological level and on a neurological level.
Amazing, incredible that
Yeah,
this would
you could
go
say
on and
that Islam is
perpetuate itself.
Islam is, from a scientific point of view, it's an unhealthy religion, from a medical point of view and psychological point of view.
Astounding. So
Yeah.
I mean, this is an element of it that I've never considered, that when one is taught that anger is a good and holy thing, that hatred, rage, and violence are something that are blessed by God, then it actually, obviously, you would cultivate these things, and then the more you do so, the worse it is for your physical and psychological well-being.
Very much. These people, you can also see, it's not happy people who behave like that, right? It is people who feel bad, who are not happy, and who actually you never hear any. You don't hear Muslim leaders and imams and so on. You don't hear them talking about happiness and so on. Not in this life, at least. They talk about anger, aggression. Hate them, and so on. But it seems like happiness they simply gave up. It's not a thing for them.
I,
I think
I'm,
they gave up.
I'm reminded of the Ayatollah Khomeini, who said
Oh yeah,
very famously, there is no fun in Islam, there is no humor in Islam, there is no fun
yeah.
or
It's a
joy
very
in
serious
anything that is
thing. Yeah,
serious.
yeah.
So
Yeah,
moving on from anger, the next element that you had identified as an indicator of the tendency of a Muslim to become a terrorist and commit an act of violence is the honor
mm.
culture. So what exactly is the honor culture?
Well, that's what they call it. They call it honor.
Hmm.
If you ask us, yeah, normal. I think if you look at Western psychology, we would call it bad self-confidence. When you're so fragile, when you're all the time looking for what are they thinking about me, are they criticizing me, and so on, it's not a question of honor. You're simply insecure.
Yes, of
Uh,
course. And then what
yeah, and
happens if they are criticizing, or if somebody is talking bad? Then what?
then they explode.
So that honor culture leads us back into anger.
Yeah, it leads us back into anger, and it's connected with, it's very opposite from Western culture. While we would say that if you're able to handle criticism, which I noticed you handle a lot of criticism on your blog, Jihad Watch,
Yes.
you have a lot of people writing, they're not so happy about your work.
I don't know
Um,
why not.
it,
It's just
yeah,
telling the truth, Why should the
yeah,
truth
I
threaten
love it.
anyone?
I read your blog every day, and I recommend it everywhere. It's great. It's really an amazing job you do every day. It's
Thank you
amazing,
very much.
and I thank you for that. But there you see, it's cool, it's signs of self-confidence if you can handle criticism. And it's completely opposite to them. They think it's not, it's what you call dishonorable.
Yes.
Is that the right
Yes,
expression?
that's
So
quite right.
say dishonorable if you don't react aggressively and explode and so on, right? So it's very different there. And then,
And so
so
it ties into, actually, this fragility and this brittleness. It ties into the war against the freedom of speech and the Islamic supremacist attempts to suppress the freedom of speech.
yeah,
It seems to me to be all part and parcel of that, they cannot endure any criticism, and that it doesn't just include the individuals, but also there cannot be any criticism of Islam, and
No, they
consequently
want to keep
they
their
want to
dirty little
forcibly
secrets
silence
for
us.
themselves.
I'm
and,
sorry,
and
I didn't catch the last
yeah, yeah, it seems they want to keep their dirty little secrets for themselves.
one. Yes, yes,
And I would,
precisely.
but if you look at the psychological studies in criminology, you will see that a lot of the studies conclude that people who are violent and aggressive and often end up breaking the law and ending up in prisons are people with a low self-esteem.
Hmm.
And it seems that, again, I would get back to psychology of the psychology that happens also within the Muslim families. It seems that the way that they bring up, especially the young boys, make them very insecure. It, it's it's both because what I think, my experience, professional experience from working with Muslims, is that first they don't really have a lot of psychology in Muslim culture, so they don't all the tools that are good to have if you want to bring people up to have be strong, self-aware, self-confident people. They don't have a lot of those pedagogical, psychological tools in their culture. And secondly, simply the boys are told that they are so much better than the women and so much better than everybody else. And Muslims in general are told that they're so much better than everybody else that they become very insecure because it's also very clear that they're not.
Yes,
And they
it's
try to hide this all the time. And it's like a balloon, it can blow anytime.
ah yes,
If you're strong, you're like a rubber ball. You can throw it on the floor, you can throw it on the wall, and you just jump back and you'll be back in the game, quickly. But if you're most Muslims, they're more like a ball of glass. You throw it and it breaks. It cannot handle any resistance, and it's
yes. And this
yeah,
is why it's extraordinary how the West is capitulating on a grand scale to the Islamic supremacist advance when just a little bit of resistance and they would fall back. A little bit of
yeah.
resistance and they can't handle any resistance. They would not be
I
able to
think
continue to advance Islamic law in the West if we just fought back, but we're not
no,
fighting back. Now,
no. It seems to me that a lot of Westerns, politicians and academics and so on, I think they kind of feel, I think they have a kind of feeling of pity with a lot of Muslims. They see all the immaturity, they see all the anger, they see all the insecurity, and so they have a kind of pity and they see them as victims and they try to help them, and like small children, try to give them another lollipop or another chance,
I
and
think you're absolutely
they
right.
don't know that yeah, and I think by that they don't understand what they're actually doing. They're destroying our own culture
Yes. Would you say,
because not,
Dr. Sennels, would you say that the very the response, the accepted response, or at least one accepted response among Westerners to people who express anger and indignation is to try to ease their anger and indignation by giving them what they want. And
yeah,
we
yeah.
generally tend to think that people don't express anger without some justifiable cause, and so we concede to them if they are angry. And so their own tendency to be angry and express indignation all the time leads to us making disastrous concessions.
You're very right. It's a very it's two things that fits very well, unfortunately.
Yes.
They're they're very easily offended and very easily angry, and we react like, oh, it's an embarrassing situation, we better help these poor people and so on. And then we give them 1 inch more, one slice more, and then hope that that will be enough. But of course it's never enough. We'll always take more and more and more.
Indeed.
And so, but you're absolutely right.
Until
It's a bad cocktail. It's a bad cocktail.
it is indeed. There's always more. Once we start down the road of accommodating Islamic law and Sharia, well, there's always more Sharia to accommodate. Now,
Yeah.
in any case, the honor culture, you say in this article, it says that honor has an essential place in Muslim culture. Muslims are expected by both themselves and their Muslim surroundings to react aggressively if they or whatever they identify themselves with or represent, family, clan, area, culture, religion, is criticized or under perceived attack. So you're saying that jihad terror attacks, to a great degree, emanate from a sense of wounded honor.
Definitely, and as you also quoted there, it's also emanates from social pressure within the Muslim society. If a Muslim is is not ready to defend, himself, his religion, whatever he stands for, then he is seen as a weak, the weak link in the chain, and he will lose status. Everybody in that in a clan culture, in clans, psychology, have to prove that they're able to defend the clan, the culture. So there's a lot of social pressure as well. I'm very sure that a lot of Muslims who behave, who would actually go against Islamic supremacism and so on. They don't dare to, because they are under pressure. They are under control. They fear the consequences if they go against it. That's why we again and again we there is probably, I know there are a lot of Muslims who are not following the Quran and who are quite relaxed and like democracy and so on. But the pressure, psychological, cultural pressure, are so big that it will not stand up. We saw the same in the Second World War. Most Germans were not Nazis, they were not racist and so on. But the pressure, the political, also kind of religious pressure, you could call it, within the Nazis, right? At least from a psychological point of view. Again, the pressure made it impossible for normal Germans to stand up and say, this is enough, now we have to stop, right? And that's why the most fanatical ones, the most aggressive, the most sick people within Islam will also be the ones who are leading and taking the lead within their culture.
Fascinating, and we have much more to discuss, but it is time for us to take a short break. This is ABN's Jihad Watch program, and I am Robert Spencer. We'll be right back after these messages. We're back. This is ABN's Jihad Watch program, and I am Robert Spencer. We are here in the middle of a fascinating discussion with Dr. Nicolai Sennels, a Danish psychologist who has done extensive work with Muslim youths in prisons in Denmark and has written a fascinating study about de-radicalizing Muslim terrorists, which was published at Jihad Watch, and we have been discussing the triggers that he has found that can be indicators, I should say, not triggers, but indicators that a Muslim may be inclined to become a jihad terrorist. And the next one on the list, Nicolai, is the victim mentality, which is something that I see Muslims manifesting every day at Jihad Watch. Can you elucidate what the victim mentality is a bit?
Well, I would like to get back to the terminology of psychology. In psychology, we talk about something called locus of control, and locus of control means where do people, how do people see their lives influenced? Do they see their lives influenced mainly by themselves or by their surroundings, by outside factors? And we here in the West mainly have an inner locus of controls. If you go to the libraries, you will see meters of self-help books. They all tell them how you yourself can change your life so you become a better person, a thinner person, a richer person, or whatever. But they always point to yourself and what you can do yourself with yourself. You can read any, women's magazine, or I think also more and more men's magazines. You can read the same there. And we have a whole industry of psychologists, therapists, coaches, and so on. And we all live from, including myself, live from helping people to realize how they are in control of their own life and how they can change their patterns, how they can change their habits, and thereby, changing their life and become, more happy and more successful. So we mainly in the West have an inner locus of control. What you see in Muslim culture is that they mainly have an outer locus of control. Everything is inshallah. That means nothing happens if Allah don't want it to happen. More than that, also everything is guided not by own choice, but mainly by outer religious rules, cultural traditions, and male authorities. So there is very little space, if any, for training and developing and experiencing inner locus of control. That's why they have the mainly outer locus of control there. That would mean for Westerners, if we have a problem, if we make a mistake, the first place we would look, if we are mature, we would look at ourselves. We say, okay, what did I do wrong? Should I talk in another way? Should I act in another way? Should I think in another way? And there, maybe with a little bit of help from our friends, we will see, actually, I can change, I can do something here myself. While we see when Muslims have problems or they make mistakes, they tend to look at the outside world, who did this to me? And of course, it's mainly the infidels that's apparently who they might like to blame the most, the big devil, the small devil, and the rest of us.
Yes. So this gets us to the victimhood mentality, which has really become the victimhood industry in the United States, the concerted effort to portray any resistance, any pushback to jihad and Islamic supremacism as Islamophobia. And they even speak about the Islamophobia industry as if we were some sort of well-funded machine, when actually it's the Muslim Brotherhood with backed by billions of dollars from around the Islamic world that is the well-oiled machine pushing this concept that Muslims are actually the victims when they are perpetrating jihad terror attacks around the world on a more or less daily basis. In Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Burma, India,
China.
Pakistan, Afghanistan, Chechnya, Nigeria. The list just goes on and on and on, and yet they are the victims. And now,
yeah, it's come from this victim mentality, which is, I would say, world famous. Everybody knows they have it. And I would say every Westerner knows that it's very embarrassing to behave like that. But still, our lawmakers and our experts and, opinion makers and so on, they tend to go with it instead of, ridiculizing and say, now you grow up and you take responsibility for your own life and so on. So it comes from this outer locus of control. But to get back to this Islamophobia, if Islam it means, what does it mean?
Submission.
Subdue or what?
Submission.
Submit, submission, yeah.
Yes.
And phobia means irrational fear of fear. And Islamophobia is what they want us to feel. They want us to fear Islam.
Yes.
They are the ones they are the ones who invented this word, and they want us to feel it. What we have, if you would ask a psychologist, is that at least many of us have, is not Islamophobia. We have Islamonausea. We
Yes.
are sick of their immature behavior, of their aggression, of their constant effort to pull down their Sharia over our heads, and the very, very negative cultural, economic, influence on our societies wherever they come.
Yes,
We have
absolutely.
Islamonausea.
Islamonausea, I believe you coined that, did you not?
Yeah, I think did. Yeah, maybe I did. Yeah,
Yes.
I wrote an article for your blog at least.
I
I remember
spoke
that.
a few years back about Islamo-realism, that
Yeah,
it's not some sort of irrational fear. It's simply an honest assessment of what we're up against.
yeah.
Yes,
We have some. We actually yesterday or 2 days ago some very brave professors in Denmark. One actually has a Turkish background. They came out with a new book that asked, "Are the Danes actually racist?" And it's based on 5 years of meta studies where they're going through all the studies, concluding that the Danes are becoming more and more racist. And their conclusions are that we are not. We are not racist. We are not xenophobic. We are not Islamophobic. What they conclude is that we have what they call rational concerns.
and the rational concerns are
Is not
entirely
Islamophobic.
reasonable to voice.
Yeah.
We have an irrational culture now which has ruled out of order rational concerns and made it so that those who voice these rational concerns are considered to be disordered in some way. It's an insane society.
It's 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 wrong. It's simply wrong, and it's very unhealthy for us. People get scared to speak up and so on because they're afraid to get this word put on that they're racist and so on. And I wish
Yes.
we would have more people who would have the strength and the courage to stand up like you and others have.
Well, I thank you very much. It's really just a matter of doing what has to be done. I recall often that the signers of the Declaration of Independence pledged their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. That's how the document actually ends. To this great cause, we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And it seemed to me axiomatic growing up that when one did find a great cause, when one did have something that was worth living for, then it was worth pledging one's life and fortune and sacred honor for it. And yet I'm amazed at the pusillanimity of so many people in the West nowadays that they don't think that anything really is worth risking those things for. And so then when you have this aggressive and angry and manipulative ideology coming and challenging the societal structures and the basic principles on which our societies are formulated, it's astonishing how easily people are capitulating. But in any case, going back to the study, you say then that identification with a religion increases the tendency to take it personally when one perceives the religion as being under attack, and that you found that this was even so among the Muslim prisoners who were not all that religious. Is that right?
Yes, that astounded me a lot. Um, Before I went to work there, I heard about religious Muslims, and I heard about criminal immigrants who didn't go to mosques. They didn't pray. They were drinking beer. They were dating non-Muslim girls and so on. But then, especially one incident that was in February. When was it? February 2000, and I think it was 7 or 8, where the Muhammad cartoons were reprinted in Danish newspapers in sympathy with Kurt Vestergaard, who was threatened, who has death threats constantly, and some people from, I think it was Morocco or Somalia, tried to kill him. So the newspapers, in sympathy with him, they reprinted him, and we had, I think we had, Denmark is a small country, but we had about between 500 and 1,000 attempts of arson, where they burned the cars and burned houses and so on. in protest against the reprinting. A lot of the people who did that came to the prison, where I was working, and they had a Muslim background, and they didn't go to the mosque. They were drinking beer. They didn't practice their religion, but still, through their upbringing, through their identity, they still felt, obligated to defend their religion. That surprised me, but it simply seemed that a lot of Muslims, because of the strong psychological imprint they have in their early childhood, then later on, whatever course their life takes, still this religious thing is a very strong psychological factor in their life.
It's something that I recently actually heard from the former Muslim Noni Darwish, who told me that when she was growing up in Gaza, which at that time was under Egyptian occupation, she said that the Nasser government was aggressively pursuing war against Israel and working to undermine Israel in every way possible and trying to put the country onto a war footing and to bring about that war. Now, the thing about that is that she said that it was all about jihad and it was all about Islam, that the Islamic anti-Semitism was what was the foundation for the hatred of the Jews that led the Nasser government to want to go to war with Israel. But what's odd about that is that this was ostensibly a secular government. It was an Arab nationalist government. Then obviously the Arab nationalists in Egypt have now just been replaced by the Muslim Brotherhood, which is much more ostensibly religious. But even though the Arab nationalists were secularists, they apparently so deeply imbibed this Islamic anti-Semitism that it guided the Nasser government's stance toward Israel.
Yeah, it's, what you put into people when they are between 0 and 5 years old is so difficult to take out again. That's the thing. And if you always have, your TV programs, from Arab countries via satellite, if you always hear that the Imam is a very holy man, the Quran is a very holy book, the Prophet is, the one to follow, and so on, then later on you may become a criminal, or you may become whatever, politician or secular politician, but it will still be inside you. And these buttons will very easily be pressed then when the religion that you identified with is criticized, because whatever you identified with becomes part of you, and then you feel criticized.
Yes.
Yeah. Pat Condell, maybe you heard about him, a comedian who often, he makes videos also. He said it very clearly, the Arabs, they don't hate the Jews because of Israel, they hate Israel because of the Jews.
Ah, yes. That's very well said. That's absolutely true. Yeah. If it were any other group that had come and established a country there, they would have trouble with any non-Muslim government. But the Jews especially, because the Jews are designated in the Quran as the worst enemies of the Muslims. And they are demonized to an incredible degree throughout the Quran. And so that is exactly what bothers them about Israel. When they take the Quran seriously and read it, it tells them to hate the Jews above all. And that leads us actually to your next point, that about religiosity. I believe that we touched on this a little bit before, but you had noted in the article since the Quran and the culture in most Muslim societies preaches aversion and in some cases even violence against non-Muslims, the degree of religiosity among Muslims is an important factor when deciding the risk of violent behavior. So obviously the more religious Muslims, even though the secular Muslims in the prison would identify with Islam and work to defend it when they perceived that it was being attacked, the more religious Muslims were more lethal. Is that right?
Well, some of them were more, you could say, more lethal, more violent. Some of them were, I cannot speak because I also have I have to keep a certain level of confidence, with my clients, but some of them could have been terrorists as well. What it seemed for me is I didn't study the Islamic scriptures as deeply as you did, but I read the Quran and other scriptures, and again, from a psychological point of view, the all the demonization of non-Muslims, about Jews, about non-believers, and so on, works as, seen from a psychological perspective, works as a the same way as when you do propaganda to your own soldiers in war. You tell how bad the enemy is, how low he is, how bad he is, how disgusting he is, and so. And that removes empathy with the enemy, and the step towards harming him becomes easier. And that's what the Quran do to Muslims. It removes empathy towards non-Muslims, and that's why it's so easy for them to harm us and hate us.
That's extraordinary. That's fascinating. I think that's also behind a great deal of the personal abuse that Muslims routinely heap upon those of us who are working in this field. And sometimes the messages, you know, you've seen some that I've published at Jihad Watch, and the most obscene ones I would never put up there. But sometimes I'm amazed, and I think, what would lead a human being to speak to another human being this way? What would be inspiring this depth of hate? And so it's fascinating for you to be saying that that the Quran and Islamic teaching remove empathy for non-Muslims. And that makes sense, since it calls non-Muslims the most vile of created beings in chapter 98, verse 6. And so it's clear that they just don't recognize somebody who is fighting against jihad and Islamic supremacism in the name of human rights, the freedom of speech, the equality of rights of all people. They just don't recognize that as a human being who has rights they are bound to respect, or as somebody who has any dignity before God or dignity as a human person in any way.
It is exactly, yeah. It's a very clever war psychology.
Yes.
The Quran is clever war psychology.
That's fascinating. Now, when they then imbibe this war psychology, and they go out and commit acts of violence in its name, then obviously those acts of violence do not make them feel as if they have done something wrong, but rather something meritorious and to be rewarded. Correct?
Yeah, you see them all. You see that I shot 2 infidels today. Hooray! They're happy, and
Oh yeah.
9/11. It's 9/11. 2001. You saw Muslims in Copenhagen. Coming out with their flags and shouting out the windows and celebrating.
It seems like a basic point, as does the fact that the more religious a Muslim will be, the greater the tendency that he may resort to violence. But these things,
Yeah.
I'm emphasizing these things because, as you know, they are routinely denied and controverted in the Western press. And so you who have experience of these things can elucidate them to a great degree that most of the time these issues are covered over with obfuscation and denial and deception. Now, the next point, the ability to feel responsibility for oneself, is important for the ability to display positive behavior. Now, how does this play into the topic at hand about how Muslims become, quote-unquote, radicalized, or how they might demonstrate tendencies to become violent?
It's very closely connected to the victim mentality. If you listen to the arguments from Muslim criminals and Muslim terrorists, then you would hear that they don't really feel so much responsible for their actions. They feel that they're driven to it either by their enemies, they're forced to react, or they're driven to made to do it by their God and their religion and their prophet.
So,
And yeah.
Well then, so if they're driven to it by their God, their religion, and their prophet, then we go right back to the
Or
same
their
thing.
enemy. Or their enemy.
Or their enemy. That if it's the
Yeah.
enemy, then yes, it's a justifiable reaction to what the enemy has done. And if it's God, the religion, the prophet, then it's simply in the service of a divine response, a divine command, and thus not something that's open to be criticized.
yeah, they don't have any choice. They feel they don't have any choice. When I made which, when I made anger management, with the young people, and we made some different role plays and so on, and staged some different role plays, and they said now we come to the point where I would normally hit him, and I say okay, but why do you want to do that? Then he say okay, it's because he irritates me. And
Hmm.
okay, but you can just look through your, you don't have to care. But he says that I have to do it when he irritates me. It's an automatic response. It's the only response, and so they feel like it's their own actions are activated by their enemy, not by themselves. And this is where this responsibility, they don't feel it, and that's why they don't feel that it's bad actions.
Isn't that something? Their own actions are activated by the enemy. That's
Mm.
extraordinary because this is what
That's
we
what they
see.
feel. Yeah.
I constantly am puzzled, Nicolai, by the extraordinary denial and the loss of the understanding of the sense of responsibility for one's own actions that we see
Mm.
manifested at the highest levels of the U.S. government. That when Muslims riot and kill because somebody has burned a Quran, we saw General Allen, the commander of the forces in Afghanistan, apologize to the Afghans. We see Barack Obama apologize, and we see calls for restriction on the freedom of
Yeah.
expression in the United States as
It seems that they buy into that logic.
precisely that they're saying
Yeah.
if they riot and kill, it's our fault. And I've constantly repeated at Jihad Watch that if my reactions are in my control and they're up to me, and I'm responsible for them. And so
Yeah.
any Muslim, when he's perceiving an insult to Islam, is also responsible for his actions, and he's the only one who's responsible for his actions. There's no automatic response to a provocation. But you're saying that
No.
there actually is, that this is a cultural mindset that many Muslims have, and consequently they assume this to be so, and now they're actually bamboozling a great deal of the West into thinking that it's so as well when these riots happen and there are calls not for them to grow up and cut out the rioting over things that don't hurt them, but calls for the West to restrict its freedom of speech.
Very much. We saw the latest incident is this Imran Firasat is this ex-Muslim Pakistani who lives in Spain, who just he made this movie called The Innocent Prophet,
Yes.
and he just had his refugee status revoked because, and I quote the Spanish authorities, they say that he is a danger to society because of the reactions that Muslims may have because of his movie.
Astonishing. A danger to
Yeah,
society because of the
yeah,
reactions that they may have. And so
of others.
what the
Yeah,
West is
yeah,
doing, we're reinforcing the principle that
yeah,
terrorism works, that violent intimidation works, and that if
yeah.
you dislike something, you can just riot and then the West will cut it out and give you what you want.
More than that, I think we simply, it seems like they're, is it called feeble-minded, or I don't know what you call it, but it's they are not able to discriminate. They're not able to see the actual logic. They they buy into that logic, and that became their logic.
Yes.
It's not just because I don't think it's just because of normal fear. They buy into it. I, I don't want to get too much into the political things. I'm not an expert on that side, but it seems there is some connection between socialism and this victim mentality, where also, if you see some socialist arguments, it also seems that they are able to create a kind of logic where it's if you are poor, if you're not, you don't have any success, it's always somebody else's fault.
Yes.
It's society have to pay for it, have to support you, have to do whatever. It's only if you're rich and depressed, then it's your own fault. You're a rich bastard, whatever. It's right. But if you're poor and depressed, it's somebody else's fault, right? So it seems that this inability to discriminate and between cause and effect and these logical sequences and so on that you find in socialism, you find the same within Islam.
Extraordinary. Yeah, I think that that's a very good point. Very insightful. That it's our responsibility to take care in a socialist society of people who are unwilling to take care of themselves when they're perfectly able to do so. But if you're in a protected victim class, then you can get these special protections. And the victimhood industry is very big in the United States, and I'm sure in Europe as well, that if groups can successfully portray themselves as being victims of societal injustice, of discrimination,
Sure.
then
It
they...
fits perfectly into socialist terminology.
exactly.
Mm.
Very, very insightful. We only have less than 2 minutes left. Could you perhaps sum up a bit more of what you have found in what radicalizes or leads Muslim prisoners, young Muslims in general, to become jihadis, those that do?
Mm, I would like to touch upon the last of the four main psychological differences between Muslims and Westerners. We already talked about on anger, on self-confidence, on self-responsibility, and the last thing is an um, you could call it maybe identity, where we are told to be that it's good to be open and tolerant towards others, people who are different from us. That's a sign of, of being a good person in our society, in our culture, while Muslims are told the opposite, that they are told they're good if they stay away from us, and so on. And that's in the fourth psychological difference. And that's also why Muslim integration will never happen to the necessary extent in the West.
Yes.
And we will have not a multicultural but a duo culture.
Nicolai Sennels, I thank you very much for your very insightful work, and it is deeply illuminating of the mindset of the jihad terrorists and the Islamic supremacists that are threatening the West today. And I thank you for it and wish you all the best with it in the future. Thank you very much for coming on to the show. This has been ABN's Jihad Watch program, and I'm Robert Spencer. Till next week, good night and God bless.
Thank you too, Robert. Thank you very much for your work.
Thank you.